Hello, weirdlings. It's your friendly neighborhood lizard lady. Okay, a very quick trigger warning. I will be talking about child death, murder, SA, and taking your own life, in the umbrella of hauntings and imprinting. No details, just mentions. In the comments section on Hannah the Horrible's second channel, I have unofficially become the Stone Tape Theory Lady. So, today, Stone Tape Theory, Science and the Paranormal had a baby. Gasp. Did I just say the title? Let's get into it. So, as I've said before, I'm an open-minded skeptic. That means that I don't believe in all paranormal claims or that every cryptid is real. I've had my own experience, and I'll tell you about that. I don't think mediums are real, at least not the ones that charge for it. Cryptids make more sense to me because we are still discovering different species, especially underwater. Most are misclassifications. Like I said in my very first Spooky Corner, most Bigfoot sightings can be attributed to bears on their hind legs. Wendigo could be a moose or deer, also on their hind legs. Ancient stories of dragons can be attributed to dinosaur fossils being discovered. King Tut's curse could have been caused by ancient toxins, bacteria, or viruses that have not been seen for thousands of years. You see, this is why I enjoy Hannah the Horrible so much. Because she doesn't just accept claims, she is a critical thinker and tries to debunk as much as possible. I love listening to ghost stories like Scared to Death, and I will never mess with a Ouija board, just in case. So let's talk about the history of the stone tape theory, what it is, and then some examples to prove the theory. As I stated in the owl theory, scientifically, a theory is a claim that has been substantiated or has viewable evidence that can prove it is true, but cannot be replicated in experimentation. So, once again, a theory is not a guess, but more of a fact that has not been fully replicated in a lab. According to Wikipedia, stone tape theory is a pseudo-scientific, or claims to be scientific, but isn't, claim that ghosts and hauntings occur when traumatic events are imprinted on certain stones or other materials and are subsequently replayed, like a film or a recording. It comes from the thought that materials hold information from emotional events and aligns with the views of the 19th century intellectuals and psychic researchers, including Charles Babbage, Eleanor Sedgwick, and Edmund Gurney. In more modern times, 1972, the BBC popularized the concept with their broadcast of the play The Stone Tape. The term was inaccurately attributed to the British archaeologist turned parapsychologist T.C. Lethbridge. Lethbridge believed that ghosts were not spirits of the deceased, but were non-interactive recordings similar to a movie, which is exactly what stone tape theory is. The concept that environmental elements are capable of storing traces of human thoughts or emotions was introduced, like I said, by multiple 19th century scholars and philosophers, trying to attempt to provide natural explanations for supernatural phenomena. For example, poltergeist activity has been attributed to the emotional turmoil within individuals going through puberty or high-stress situations, giving a sort of telekinesis, a real-life mutant, without even knowing it. Will-o-wisp fairy lights are bioluminescence from the natural decay of vegetation and formerly living organisms. Cattle mutilation is a natural decomposition from carrion and insects, rather than extraterrestrials. And as I mentioned earlier, cryptids. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, skunk ape, all being bears. Wendigo, deer, or moose. Chupacabra is a canid with mange. Nessie is a large fish or a group of fish. That is, if they aren't proven to be real in the future. As humans, we try to see the patterns, the explanations, the reasoning behind things. As someone with ADHD, even before I knew, I would find patterns in things subconsciously. And that's just natural. It's similar to the pareidolia effect, where we as humans see faces in objects. Whether it be an outlet, tile, a picture, toast, or the knots in wood. In the first place, Theo and I rented where both of our names were on the lease in Ruby Creek, literally on Elm Street. The bedroom door was made out of polished, unpainted wood. You could see the knots. I insisted that we close the door when we sleep because one of the knots looked like an anguished face. I knew I would have a nightmare on Elm Street if I saw it in the middle of the night. Then, after moving into our current house, which we own, I woke up, and during the waking process, as my vision was clearing and my eyes were coming together to focus, one eye saw Theo's robe on the back of the door, and the other saw one of my stuffed animals on top of my dresser, a taunt, niece, or house gnome named Yule. Theo gave him to me one year for Christmas. The two came together to form a pointy-headed, robed shadow figure standing in the doorway of the bedroom. I started screaming. Theo, next to me in bed, woke up with a start. Bram and Riker came running to the bedroom. They both would have jumped on the bed, and Riker would have stood over me as he yelled and barked at whatever was hurrying or scaring me. The only thing that stopped him was a baby gate. He was barking his head off. They both got cookies and hugs. I realized what it was, and I took the effing robe off of the back of the door. My point is, looking for a scientific explanation is human, and I personally agree with most of them. In 1837, Charles Babbage, a polymath, published his thoughts on natural theology called the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise. According to Babbage, spoken words leave a permanent impression in the air, even after the words have disappeared. He suggested that this was possible due to the transfer of motion between particles. I'll come back to this shortly, because I don't think he was that far off. It could also come from the concept of place memory. The Society for Cyclical Research, if you're a fan of And That's Why We Drink, like I am, you've heard Em talk about the Society for Cyclical Research and Harry Price. So, the SPR, Society for Cyclical Research, when they first began, place memory was an explanation for ghostly apparitions connected to certain places. In the late 19th century, two researchers, Edmund Gurney and Eleanor Sidgwick, who I mentioned earlier, presented their views that certain buildings or materials are capable of storing records of past events, which can then be played back by people who are gifted or sensitive to the paranormal. Another idea from the 19th century associated stone tape theory with psychometry, which is the belief that it is possible to obtain knowledge about the history associated with an object through physical contact. Consider the episode of Bob's Burgers where Linda is convinced that she has psychic powers after bonking her head. If that was the case, I would be Irene Adler, Destiny, or Alison Dubois, the character Patricia Arquette plays on Medium, inspired by a real person because of the number of times I've hit my head. Linda touches an object, a knife associated with the case, makes a noise, gah, trying to activate her psychic abilities, and says the police have the wrong person. Sergeant Boscow asks if she's sure. She isn't completely. But then he admits the police know they have the wrong person. That is psychometry in a nutshell. In the 20th century, specifically 1939 and 1940, psychometry was reintroduced by the then president of the SPR, Harry Price. As I said, it's a big topic on And That's Why We Drink. Price speculated about psychic ether, which is a bridge connecting the spiritual and physical reality. It enables objects to carry mention, traces of emotions, or experiences from the past. In his writing, Price stated that the existence of these traces should be provable by means of scientific methods. However, they haven't been proven by hypotheses, which is the scientific method, making it, once again, a theory. It can't be replicated in the lab. Expanding on Price's ideas, T.C. Lethbridge, again mentioned earlier, claimed that past events can be stored in objects thanks to fields of energy. He believed that these fields surrounded streams, forests, or mountains. These ideas were popularized in his 1961 book, Ghost and Ghoul, which was alleged to have inspired the creators of the 1972 BBC play, The Stone Tape. See, we have come full circle. Let's talk a little bit about some criticism and current ideas before I go into my own thoughts. More than I already have. In the book, How to Think About Weird Things, Critical Thinking for a New Age, Theodore Schick and Louis Vaughn dismissed the idea as an irrational claim. They stated, "The problem is that we know of no mechanism that could record such information in a stone or play it back. chunks of stone just do not have the same properties as reels of tape. They have a point. I agree with them there. But that doesn't mean the stone tape theory isn't right, just that the recording mechanism is incorrect. Sharon Hill, a science educator and geologist, says that the term stone tape theory is misleading. She stated that it's suggested to encompass structure, credibility, and explanatory power or scientific theory, while in reality it is speculation that lacks physical basis. According to her, it is an attempt to present a pseudoscientific claim in a way that seems scientific. She also suspects that the kernel of the idea of stone tape is psychometry, which is criticized for being a form of cold reading rather than an explained supernatural phenomenon. Now, she has some points, but here's the thing. She's looking at it in a way that's different from how I look at it. She's seen it as a more geological statement that the stone is a literal window to the past. Perhaps it could be, or could not be the case. Just because people have stated that limestone and other sedimentary rock can retain things, and that's where the literal stone part of the stone tape theory comes in, as well as streams and running water, that could be able to channel psychic energy. Let's look at the scientific theory that is the conservation of energy. Yes, I am going full science here on a pseudoscience subject. Something that has been disproven in some areas, but could still be 100% factual, or at least as factual as you can be with a theory in the scientific sense. Conservation of energy, in its earliest forms, goes all the way back to 550 BCE, before the Common Era. Over 2,026 years ago. So, limestone does not channel energy like that. Could it conduct energy? Possibly. I don't know. I'm not a geologist or an engineer of any kind. Go ask Kyle Hill. I personally don't know. But I do know that the conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only changed. Think of it like the water cycle. You have water on the ground, it warms up, turns into a gas, and goes up into the sky. Turns into a solid, where we get clouds. The clouds start to get too heavy. Rain comes down and falls to the earth, puddles, rivers, lakes, oceans, etc. And then it happens all over again. We learn about this in early science classes. The Magic School Bus even has an episode on it. So if we look at stone tape theory in the same way, it's not that unlikely. Let me give you a hypothetical. We have an average Iowa farmhouse. One day in June back in the 1910s. June 9th through 10th, 1912 to be exact. The whole town changes in one night. 8 people go to bed one night, they don't wake up in the morning. 2 adults, 6 children, all were bludgeoned with the blunt end of an axe. Why the blunt end? Well, to be blunt, the blade gets stuck in the skull, making it hard to extract and swing again. The killer learned this after the first victim and pivoted for the next 7 victims. We know this not by the autopsies, but by the other evidence. The notches in the ceiling specifically. Why do the bodies not tell us? The heads are, I'll be delicate here, gone. The victims didn't wake up, not even the ones who were sleeping in the same bed. One was awake, we assume, because of the way her body was positioned in the bed. Okay, this isn't a hypothetical, it's an actual case. I'll be dedicating a full video to the case in the future, and my book that started this whole project, the first 5 chapters in their rough draft form, are available on Wattpad. I'm talking about the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. The neighbors didn't hear anything. They didn't know until the next day. No one was ever convicted, the case remains unsolved, and it is highly talked about amongst true crime and paranormal circles. Some of the people who have covered it are Ghost Adventures, BuzzFeed Unsolved, Scared to Death, and That's Why We Drink, and Spine Chillers and Serial Killers. In fact, the majority of podcasts I regularly listen to, I found searching Google Podcasts and Spotify for the Villisca Axe Murders. I have even submitted my personal story to Scared to Death, Spine Chillers and Serial Killers, and Hannah the Horrible's second channel. Hannah did read my story. Let me now tell you as it pertains to what we are talking about. So, my great-grandparents, Clark and Esther Devine, as I have said, that is in fact my maiden name, After they married in the 1940s or so, they bought farmland and built a house just outside of Villisca, Iowa, with cash. Clark and Esther raised their son Don in that house on their pig farm. When Don married Sharon in the 1960s, Clark and Esther paid to have a house built on the property. Don and Sharon had my father and uncle, who they raised in that second house. My father left for college, met Stephanie, and they had Sable. Do you see where I'm going? When Clark and Esther retired, they moved to a house inside the city limits of Villisca, just a block away from the infamous murder house. In fact, the house they lived in is the current information center for the Villisca Axe murder house. Even though none of the people I have mentioned were alive at the time, they knew about the house. It's absolutely town gossip. When Clark and Esther moved out of the farmhouse, my father, Stephanie, and I moved in. I was between 3 to 7 years old at the time we moved in. We lived there until I was 7. That would have been 1995. I looked up the time period of the renovations on the house. They began in 1995 and finished in 1996. I know I was in the house no later than 1995 because of my age, 7, when my parents divorced, and the fact that I have not returned to Villisca, though the farmhouses are still owned by my father and uncle. Knowing this context is important so that you understand the circumstances of when I had my one possible ghost encounter, which reinforces my belief in the stone tape theory. During the restoration, the bathroom was reconverted into the pantry, the outhouse was restored, and all electricity and modern creature comforts were removed. That includes HVAC systems for heating and cooling. This is very important. It was summertime. I know that because my undiagnosed narcissistic personality disorder mother, I'll go into depth on her in May. For now, think Dee Dee Blanchard minus the nursing degree, but she did have a minor in child psychology. She was curling my hair for a parade, Founders Day type of thing, and burnt the side of my head and the back of my ear with the curling iron. It took me almost 30 years to buy and then use my first curling iron after that. I went into the newly restored but not fully open for business Villisca Axe murder house. No one told 7-year-old me what happened there. Why would they? I remember seeing the axe, some red spots, probably paint, and the notches in the ceiling beam. The restoration was done using photos of the house. I was walking with whatever adults came to the house with me, up the stairs past the grandfather clock and into a cold spot. See? I told you the details were important. Cold spots are a manifestation of stone tape that you can feel. Heat and cold both come from energy. Now that we are talking about energy in relation to hauntings and getting into where stone tape theory and conservation of energy intersect, let's look at the image. The people are an AI-generated image. I'm not ashamed to admit that I use AI for my images, but I'm picky. I don't trust AI to edit anymore. I write and then use Grammarly, still AI, but mostly for punctuation. But the writing and the performance is all me. 100% human. At least as far as I know. So, like I was saying, the image, the part with the people, which took a few hours to get the AI to actually comprehend what I was saying, is AI. The background is a picture I took on October 10th, 2024, when the Aurora Borealis was visible in the sky in my backyard in the real-world Ruby Creek in northeastern Nevada. That is a visual representation of energy in the atmosphere. Not only do the Aurora Borealis prove that energy is in the atmosphere, just by existing, you live energy. For that energy to imprint, it either needs to build up or have a burst. That's how we get similar hauntings. A traumatic incident, a person reliving their routine, or a moment in their life for all eternity. When I say there's energy in the atmosphere, don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist who thinks that 5G or Wi-Fi is doing something strange to our bodies. But radio waves, microwaves, and radiation all fall under the same umbrella of atmospheric energy. If you have seen Christopher Nolan's The Prestige, you'll remember David Bowie portraying Nikola Tesla, who was, in fact, a real inventor. In the movie, Tesla, with his assistant, played by Andy Serkis, is up in the mountains where Hugh Jackman finds him and learns about the teleportation machine. No spoilers. In the ground of the mountain are a bunch of light bulbs, but no cords connecting them. So how do they light up? This is an actual experiment that Tesla was working on, and said that with funding, he could prove it. Before the final experiment was proven, J.P. Morgan, yes, that J.P. Morgan, revoked his funding, Tesla couldn't finish the experiment, and all of his research was seized, either by the government, Morgan, or Thomas Edison. Not a conspiracy theory. It actually happened. What exactly was the experiment? It was to harness natural electricity, energy if you will, to power the world, which is presumably why the funding was cut. Morgan realized he couldn't make money off of it. Capitalism, baby. You probably want more proof, am I right? Okay, let's talk about Tesla coils. First, have you ever heard that when there is a lightning storm, your hair will stand up on end if you are close enough to the strike point? Like when you rub a balloon on your hair? Same concept. Just a visible way to see energy, electricity, and static electricity. A Tesla coil has electricity running through it and sets off sparks. When a plasma globe is attached to a Tesla coil and filled with noble gases, you can view the electricity. When you touch the orb, the tendrils of electricity converge to your hand, and your hair stands up on end, as the electricity goes through your body. Energy, science, atmosphere. Are we all on the same page? Okay, so we have two main types of hauntings, the intelligent and the residual. The intelligent is the kind that answers questions, turns on flashlights, and moves the planchette of a Ouija board. If that isn't all subconsciously controlled, I don't have an explanation. As for the residual, that's exactly what we're talking about. So, a lot of hauntings that occur in schools, hospitals, theaters, battlegrounds, and other high-traffic areas can easily be explained by heightened emotions, traumatic events, and death, leaving an impression on the location. You may be asking why some ghosts float. Because the foundation of the home has sunk since the time they were alive, or a new building is in its place. Why do some ghosts walk through walls? Because the floor plan has changed since the time they were alive. Are you still with me? This is what people mean when they say blueprint theory. Let's talk about the guy who was working on the restoration of a site in Great Britain. This was sometime in the 1960s or so. He looks up and sees Roman centurions marching in formation. But only from the knee up. What the F? At a different location, same site, same man, sees the troops again. But this time they're floating above the ground. I ask again, what the F? He was so confused. At the time, it was known that the Roman Empire had been that far north, but with a caveat. The known soldiers carried different shields. But during the restoration, artifacts were found. So, what's the deal with the difference in how they were seen? The road they were traveling on had been both raised and lowered from the time the Roman centurions would have walked there. How cool is that? What about Gettysburg, the battleground of the Civil War? People see and hear soldiers, horses, cannons, gunfire, etc. What's more traumatic than war? Let's finish with the Queen Mary. Fun fact. The people behind the Queen Mary went to King George V and said, "We would like to name our ship after the greatest queen England has ever known." King George said, "Mary would love that." Mary being his wife, Mary of Teck, while the builders actually meant his grandmother, Queen Victoria. But you don't argue with the king. Currently, she is docked off the coast of California. She had a long life as a luxury liner and was a member of the British Navy during World War II, painted gray and called the Grey Ghost, because of how fast she could move. During her time at war, she was hit by torpedoes and even went right through a smaller ship. And like that American Dad episode when Steve and Debbie are playing Battleship, and they mentioned the guy that only the front half made it through the bulkhead in time. Something similar happened on the Queen Mary. Many people have heard sounds of battle, cries of anguish, and unease. There's one story about a boy who was yanked away from a door by a man in a World War II era uniform. Giggles of a little girl who was said to have drowned in the first-class swimming pool, and little wet footprints around the pool. Now, I'm not saying ghosts are real, I'm just giving you one singular, plausible explanation for hauntings. You don't have to believe me. You could even tell me how stupid I sound in the comments. But fair warning, if you're really rude, I'll downvote you and maybe even block you. The history of the theory I took from Wikipedia, which is where I started most of my research. The rest of this was all me. It's been floating around in my head for years. Sleep well, weirdlings, and science and the paranormal really can stand side by side and work together to help us understand our world.